Hi, my name is Yonatan Bisk, and I'm a new assistant professor in the Language Technologies Institute in SCS. And my research is on the question of connecting language to actions and the world. And what I mean by that is how can language help, for instance, robotics, and then how can language learn from robotics? And where you would normally think about these kinds of things would be in the context of things like smart and digital assistants. So if you think about, for instance, Alexa and Siri and those types of devices, then you're used to this idea that you can talk to them and they're going to do something in the world for you. But it's a very programmatic notion of that. So for example, you could tell Alexa to turn on the living room lights if you specify living room. You could never say, turn on the light near me. And why? It's because it has no concept of physical space. It has no notion of where it exists. And so if we're going to make a transition to that self-driving car, if we're going to make a transition to that helpful robot in your household, then we have to figure out how we imbue these systems with this ability to actually learn about the physical world and connect language to it. And we already are making small steps in that direction in consumer products. So for example, with a Facebook portal or the new Google Homes and things like this, they have cameras enabled. And so they actually can perceive the world. And so they can make a little bit of progress towards connecting some of your language to what they might be seeing. But we still have a huge gap. And one of the reasons for that big gap is because there is a siloed way in which we actually train all of these systems and how we learn these language processing modules. So in particular, what we set out in sort of recent work of mine, and we have a specific sort of philosophical framework for this, is this notion of sort of world scopes. So that's kind of the framing that I would like to present when thinking about this space. What does it mean to train a language processing system on web text, which is what most of us are most familiar with? What does it mean to train it on the entirety of the web, which means imagining a system that not only learns language by reading Wikipedia, but also by watching YouTube? And then what does it look like to actually train a system in the real world, or in a system that is embodied in some way? And what new capabilities are sort of given to the system by virtue of doing that? So specifically, what kinds of semantics, what kind of meaning does a system get access to, does an agent get access to when it moves into each of these next world scopes? So I'm going to throw up on the slide really quickly an example of what these look like in practice. If we imagine what is currently happening, so the state of the art in web search and stuff like this is in what we would call world scope 2. So this is where you have access to the textual internet. And this is what is baked into what are called sort of these standard BERT models. These are the models that run Microsoft Bing and Google search. So these are ubiquitous now. But what we claim in my research agenda is that you have a limited notion of language when you learn from web text alone. So you can't learn language just from the radio, i.e. from the internet. Imagine a human trying to learn language without ever seeing anything. That seems like it's fundamentally limiting in terms of your understanding of words. And so what we claim is that you need to move into world scope 3. You need to broaden the space of semantics you have access to include the visual and auditory. That's the sort of YouTube style learning I was referring to a second ago. We then say you should actually take it one step further. You can't learn language from the from the television. Imagine that you had a child that you were raising that you never interacted with. You just sat them down in front of a video and said, learn language. That's also going to be fundamentally limiting because you're only going to be able to ever learn what someone has demonstrated. And people don't show you the whole of existence. They only show you a curated version of it. And then finally, we note the sort of world scope 5, which is that you can't learn language by yourself. So even if you were interacting with the world, so even if you have all of YouTube, you have all of the sort of like physical robot going around and poking things and knocking things over, if you don't have another interlocutor, if you don't have another person to speak to, you're not actually modeling their cognitive processes. You're not modeling their internal drives and desires. And so you don't fully understand language either. And so what we're doing here is setting out a roadmap for what we think the future of language processing looks like. And specifically, if we think about the meaning of any given word, how it is that we broaden that word to have the sort of full richness of what the human means when they use it. And that includes, again, the perceptual world, the interactive world of embodiment, and then the social world. A really silly kind of example of this would be if we wanted to look at a couple of individual words as like a toy brain teaser. So imagine that I were to ask you which of these words is most similar to one another. If I were to ask you whether or not an orange is more like a banana or like a baseball. If I only had access to text, then I have a bunch of recipes on the internet. And so if I were to ask Google which of these words are most similar, it would tell me that an orange is clearly the same thing as a banana because it's seen them in recipes. It's seen them basically interact in this kind of similar context. But if I were to, for instance, actually have access to vision, I would know that that's all of a sudden quite different. The orange and the baseball are very similar in size and shape, which we all know. When we say orange and baseball, we have access to that meaning. And then finally, if I was to actually ask a robot, then the fact that if I squeeze too hard, the orange and the banana both squish, but the baseball does not, is new information that we get access to. And so on a very practical, shorter term level, rather than this sort of large philosophical scope we were talking about a second ago, there's this basic research question, which is, if I want to build the meaning of the simple word like orange, banana, baseball, everyday objects, I can't build that unless I also have a system that can see them and I have a system that can feel them. And so how do we build such a system? And then how do we make sure that the information that is gained by virtue of that interaction is propagated back into whatever representation we built for those words so that our next generation language understanding systems have access to the full richness of the meaning that we as humans imply when we're referencing these things. But these are just sort of a simple example of where this research agenda is going and what a taste of what the larger set of projects are that are going on in the lab with actual robots and with these sort of large web crawls and so forth. And I'm happy to talk about all those things more. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for having me and looking forward to chatting about where this goes.